right, here we are, buddy. Here we are, Plato Book 4. All right, getting started. Now, being this book, Plato's going to start off with something that seems kind of strange. It's about painting statues. We look at these Greek and Roman stuff, we'll see that they're all white. Well, this is how they look after the rains hit them. They've been washed off, all the paint's been washed off, and they've been cleaned, right? In the original state, the Greeks really liked colors. So they painted these things, all kinds of things, oranges, purples, right? Things that don't make a lot of sense to us, but when you first discover, right, new paints and oils and things like this, right, it's apparently a lot of fun to play with them, and this is they did, right? So we look at these things, we see them white. So Plato's talking about how to paint the statue at the beginning of this text, and he's talking about making the overall statue look good, not just emphasizing, for instance, the face or the eyes. Like some of the people in the audience think it might be a good idea to do the statue. Look at those wonderful eyes, let's make them look really sharp. We'll paint them a good purple and kind of fetching out the rest, make a little duller colors, and make the eyes really stand out. Plato says, no, I don't want to do that. I want to look at the overall society. So when I'm focusing, people say, well, you're not really focusing on the happiness of your leaders. No, you're focusing on the happiness, right, of the people that are going to be in charge. He said, well, that's exactly right. I'm trying to make a society where everybody is being focused on. Primarily, the purpose of the leadership is to focus on the population, not to make themselves happy, right? He thinks they will be made happy by the life of study, but that's not the primary purpose of society or, right, the point of view. So just like painting a statue, we're going to make the whole statue look good. We're going to make the entire city look good and not worry in particular about making the eyes or the head look good, right? And so they'll go back then and talking about how to go into the character, right, safeguarding of his warriors and leaders, right? Plato is, right, these things, these guys, when you had, back in the Bronze Ages, right, Philip of Macedonia had a saying, there is no wall so high that gold cannot scale it, all right? And what he meant by this is a lot of times you came to attack a city, you had to go into siege around. It can take 12 months, 24 months, right? Maybe your own army catches a disease, right? So it's a precarious occupation or profession tackling cities. Unless you, right, as he would, he'd often bribe the guards at the gate. And these old cities were surrounded by walls, so if the guards at the gate were bribed, they'd simply open the gates when Philip's army showed up. His army just march in and he'd take the city in the afternoon. So as Plato's going to point out, the real importance here is to make sure, right, the silvers and golds, the warriors and the leaders, right, have the proper characters, as opposed to worrying too much, right, about whether the cobbler, right, does his job correctly, right. In this regard, shoemaker, right, for Plato, if he does his job poorly, the city isn't going to be affected. Now, a few bad shoes won't be a big deal, but a bad job of guarding, right, the gates, and you could lose the city in the afternoon, right? Another big theme that Plato's going to hit on is wealth and poverty, right? He sees extremes in this as ruining people for work. The extremely wealthy, right, stop working, they have no need to work, right? And the extremely poor cannot work. If I hire people to help fix my house or do stuff, I expect them to bring their own tools. So there's a certain amount of things you have to have in order to engage in any profession, be it books or being a philosopher, right, and education as well, right, or, right, carpentry tools to be a carpenter. So he wants to limit those things, as extreme poverty keeps people from working, as does extreme wealth. You have these idle, right, wealthy people that go around causing trouble then in politics, right. And Plato's going to talk about defense of the city as well. He's going over a number of themes here in the very beginning of Book 1. And he thinks it's going to be a tough city to take, right, insofar as he's got these professional soldiers been trained from birth up, right, that his own city has a lack of gold and silver, so not using, right, a big emphasis on the stockpiling of wealth. So there's not be a real reason to attack, right? Usually attack the cities to grab a bunch of goodies and run away. You're not going to have that as a draw to Plato's city, right? And he thinks the aggressor states against his society will have a divided population, the rich versus the poor. And he'll be able to use this, right, division, internal division, to cause problems in their home cities. So the army has to return and to sort out the rebellion, as opposed to, right, continuous aggression against his ideal society. So tough warriors, right, nothing really to gain, and your inability to really prosecute the war against him insofar as your own society is unjust and will suffer from those consequences, right, in a war against his society with the proper, right, stimulation at home. Plato's going to start off defining justice now. We kind of got the kind of ideas put together. Now he's going to start drawing it all together. And this is the idea that there's one man, one job, or one person, one job. And that can seem rather simplistic at first after all the things we've gone through. What he's talking about here is that each of the different classes, the gold, silvers, and bronze, focus on that profession and that profession alone. They don't try to do anybody else's job. Plato sees that in democracy you have people that don't really know much about, shall we say, the art of government, right, all of a sudden will be very successful at plumbing, perhaps, and say, I'm a great plumber, I should therefore be a great governor. And the two don't necessarily match over all the time, right? So he's very resistant to these ideas of people that have not been specifically trained and educated. And he's got a 30-year program for education for his leaders. So there's an extensive program of education he's got in mind for these individuals. 15 years of theoretical training followed up by 15 years of practical, before you're given any kind of real authority. And plenty of time to sort these people out if they don't do the job. So he's got all kinds of safeguards built into this. But the idea is that this is a really complicated thing to be doing, taking control of a society, trying to make decisions for it. If you don't know exactly what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be playing with it. The same thing with military generals. They may be very good on the battlefield, but there's no reason to think Caesar, for instance, has been a great emperor like Augustus was, Augustus was a great administrator, Caesar perhaps just a great general. So he wants to eat the silvers out of taking over society as well. If I'm a great battlefield leader, why can't I run the society? Those kind of concerns, Plato's dealing with here at the beginning of Book 4. So he wants to keep them all in their own general areas. The educated individuals who've been specifically instructed in how to come at running a society, the ones that should be in charge of it. And this is where I think Plato's really getting into the heart of what his idea is here. And it solves for the problem he may put in here later. We all kind of get it's on this idea of putting a bunch of educated people in charge. Sounds like the Middle Ages where the Roman Catholic Church kind of took over things. So it's the danger of regression there. And what Plato's going to be talking about here is that he could get rid of all this if he could simply get a good education for everybody. And that's what I think the real balance here is, we can go forward taking from Plato, if we want to find a way to use his ideas today. It's not that we need to divide into three classes and people mind their own business, shall we say, in these three classes, so much as provide a good education to everybody. If you don't really have an understanding of economics, it's hard to understand what a good tax policy would be, what good trade policies are. So the more we have a citizenry that's educated, shall we say, in economic theory, the better we'd be off, as a nation trying to make economic decisions, and so on and so forth. So now that we're in a position, the Bronze Ages, you couldn't educate that many people. You've got, 70% of your population at least committed just to food production, So you've got difficulties in taking people out of this to do something else. However, nowadays we can pull people out of production, not have them engage in labor until they're 25, 30, if you go to law school, things like this, medical school, before you actually start really becoming a wage earner, As a result of that, there's a possibility of making an educated democracy. Remember, Plato's talking about, a uneducated democracy, the masses rising up and have the difficulty to execute Socrates, You're not talking about an educated democracy. That might function, very differently, So that's the one kind of kernel you can take out of this and see how to take the entire theory and revamp it to today's needs, insofar as we want to put an educated leadership in charge. We want to keep our democracy. Well, an educated democracy may be the solution. And it's here in Plato, There you go, Plato Book 4. He's already suggested it, So that's the nice thing about this guy. You just go back to him and it's just full of all these ideas you can constantly draw upon when you go through this stuff, And now here's another good point. We have all kinds of laws in our society today. We make them without even paying much attention anymore, And Plato thinks that abundance of laws is unnecessary, Either you're going to follow, if you have some basic rules, either you follow them or you don't, If you don't follow them, that's the real problem. Not that we didn't have enough rules about it, So for Plato, thou shalt not murder is good enough. Going farther beyond that and classifying different kinds of things as hate crimes may be missing the point, That the problem is they're killing people, not the problem is why they killed people so much, shall we say. So that's shall we say, you want to get people to just follow the general rules of behavior first, and then perhaps we can build an elaborate rule structure. If we're not following the basic rules, what makes us think we'd follow a more elaborate set of rules? And there's a reason to think that you would. All right, now Plato sees a good person. This way is a little more complicated. Trying to come up with the full theory of justice here, That you have three parts to the mind. You have reason, your ability to think, solve problems, identify, solve problems. You have the emotion or spirited part, emotional part, spirited part, and then you have an appetitive part, the appetites, And each of these three drives are part of our mind. This is mostly Plato's descriptive psychology, He'll then put on this a prescription, So describe what's in the mind and then how, that mind should be governed, how it should operate. So each of these parts of the mind have a proper role, proper function, a associated virtue, an excellence, the best way it should be used. The appetites are there to make sure we get enough to eat, we have nutrition and food, take care of our basic bodily concerns, and therefore the virtue for these things things is temperance, which is a form of restraint. You don't just indulge the appetites endlessly, right? You indulge them to a certain degree, and then you're done. You go on, right, to a healthy degree, right, and then no more, right? The same thing with the emotions for Plato, right? These are very powerful things, but they have a proper role, proper function, and this is courage, right? This is supporting the decisions of reason, right, when it makes it, not being moved by promises of pleasure and threats of pain. So the final virtue added, right, the virtue of wisdom, is wisdom is added to reason. So if you have all three of these other virtues, temperance, the ability to control your appetites, courage, putting your emotional decisions behind, right, your intellectual decisions, and then using your reason to figure out problems when you see them and not react in an emotional or repetitive fashion, right, for Plato, then if you have all three of these, you have justice. We look back to a city, we see the same formula already being composed there, right? We have the gold, silvers, and bronze, right? The bronzes are paying attention to their jobs, producing, doing what they should be doing, right? The temperate function of the body, right? The silvers, right? The auxiliaries, the warriors, right? The ones who have courage, right? The emotional side of the city, they support the decisions of the leadership, right? The gold element or the rational element, right? Who has wisdom. Now, Plato defined wisdom fully in Book 7, so this is undefirmed wisdom. Yeah, sure, it sounds nice. Get somebody who understands the Proverbs. It's a little more complicated than that. We'll get into that. It's a whole other discussion. We'll have to get into Plato's entire metaphysical structure to explain his theory, right, on what wisdom is. But, right, that's the idea to go. And when you have all three of those virtues for Plato, then you have the final virtue of justice, right? And now you're a well-behaved individual. And it sounds like a pretty good formula. If you got to know what to do, right, have the courage to do it, and you don't get drunk and miss the opportunity, right, perhaps you're looking at somebody who's well-behaved, right? So his city's going to be good in the fullest sense as it possesses, right, all these three virtues and hence justice. And you're going to need to have, right, once again, that ordering, right, with the golden top, right, the silver supporting them, right, and the bronze listening to both, right. We're moving through about number 13 now, right, in terms of the MC. For Plato, the justice in the individual and the justice in the city are very similar things, right? And he has very interesting proof of the three parts of the mind, right? Or at least the parts divided mind. He goes on to proof 3 later. But it's the idea of you can put a poisoned, somebody thirsty, you can put a poisoned glass of water in front of them. You tell the person it's poison, right? Their appetite say drink, but the mind says no, right? That shows division for Plato between the two impulses, right? See the same kind of thing when you're rubbernecking on the interstate. You'll see people driving by an accident, right? The proper thing to do is drive by quickly, right? Not sit there and drive by slowly and look over. However, right, our appetites tend to get the better of us and want to see what happened, and we rubberneck situations when we shouldn't, right? It's the same kind of situation here. Yeah, and basically, folks, it's the same kind of concept. At the end of the book, he's going to draw together and compare an unjust person to an unhealthy body, right? If you were unhealthy, you'd like to get healthy. Same thing with being unjust. You want to replace that with a condition of justice. So Plato's going to tie these concepts together, health and justice, right? Mental health and justice. And I think that about completes a good summary of Book 4.